My son said he was worried about me. He gave me a smart bracelet to monitor my heart rate and sleep. But 3 weeks later, I heard my own voice playing from a recording, even though I thought I was alone in the kitchen. They had given me that bracelet with promises of health and care, but deep down I felt a growing unease, like I had been locked inside an invisible cage, watched and controlled every minute of the day. Have you ever felt betrayal coming from something that seemed like love? My story doesn't end there. And if you want to know how I woke up and broke free from that trap, stay with me. Before I begin, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you feel comfortable, leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, let me tell you what really happened. My name is Kathleen, and I'm 65. To most people, I suppose, I'm the kind of woman they'd call strong, a single mother living in a small house in the suburbs of Seattle who taught high school literature for over 30 years. I raised my children alone after their father left, not in a dramatic fight, no shouting, no tragedy. He just disappeared. I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart. I didn't have the time. Robert was 7. Charles had just turned 4. I looked into their eyes and knew I had no choice but to stay strong. And I did. I did everything a mother could do, sometimes more. Robert was always the calm one, a little distant but incredibly intelligent. In middle school, he taught himself programming from old library books I couldn't make sense of. He got a full scholarship to college, graduated early, and joined a tech company whose name I could never remember. Robert lived in his own world, and I got used to not stepping into it. I always thought that was normal. Gifted kids often need their own space. I'd taught many students like him. Charles was different, softer, more sensitive. He used to ask me random questions like, "Are you happy, Mom?" or "Do you ever feel lonely?" I would usually chuckle and pat his head. Charles was the only one in the house who still sat down to eat breakfast with me even as he got older. But lately, even that had started to fade. I can't recall what changed first: Robert's gaze, which now seemed to assess me constantly, or the long silences at dinner, maybe both. Then one day, Robert handed me a small white box and said it was a birthday gift. Inside was a sleek modern bracelet, a smart health monitoring band, he said. It was simple in design, silver, quite elegant. I smiled, not at the gift, but at the way Robert gently touched my wrist while helping me put it on. In that moment, I didn't feel like a lonely, aging mother. I felt like someone my son still thought of, if only for a brief second. Robert said the bracelet could track my heart rate, blood pressure, sleep patterns, even alert me if I was stressed. He spoke as if it were the best thing technology had to offer for the elderly. I didn't think of myself as elderly, but I stayed quiet. I knew he meant well, and yet, little by little, something inside me started to stir very faintly, like the wind whistling through a crack in the door on a winter night. I couldn't name it. It was just a feeling that something wasn't right. Charles began avoiding me. He no longer spoke the way he used to. When I asked, he'd force a smile and say, work was busy. But I'd been a teacher. I knew when someone was hiding something. And I knew Charles wasn't good at lying. Every time Robert came up in conversation, Charles's eyes dropped, and his fingers would tighten just a bit. Robert remained polite, confident, always in control. But he felt increasingly distant. Every question I asked got a brief, calculated answer, tidy to the point of discomfort. He began showing up at my house, unannounced, checking if I was wearing the bracelet using the app. I once thought it was concern, and maybe part of me still wanted to believe that, but I began to feel like I was being watched. One time I took the bracelet off because the skin on my wrist was irritated. Less than an hour later, the phone rang. It was Robert. He asked if I was okay, because the system reported the device had been disconnected. I laughed it off, told him everything was fine. But after hanging up, I sat in silence. He knew the moment I took the bracelet off. I'm not someone who believes in conspiracy theories. I believe in science, in logic, in things that can be seen and measured. But a mother's love. There's one thing no science can ever explain: intuition. I can feel when my child is hurting, when he's hiding something from me, and now I can feel that I'm no longer trusted. Something had fractured in my family, not because of one big event, but from a string of small things like hundreds of tiny cracks. forming on a glass pane that still appears whole. Evenings spent alone in the living room, staring at old photos, me and my boys smiling on a beach long ago, were now just memories. Beautiful memories, but also proof that something had changed. I didn't know what kind of journey I was stepping into, whether it was one of uncovering the truth or one filled with pain, as I realized love alone couldn't keep everything intact. But I knew somehow I had to keep going. And this time, I wasn't sure I could trust anyone but myself. I used to believe that the smart bracelet Robert gave me was simply a gift wrapped in love, a thoughtful token from a son to his aging mother. I told myself it was their way of protecting me, of staying close in my twilight years, through the convenience of modern technology, through a kind of care this new era could offer. But the truth revealed itself layer by layer, crueler and more bitter than I ever imagined. It all started on a cold winter night. I woke up in the middle of the night to a quiet room, broken only by the wind rustling outside the window. A soft yellow streetlight spilled through the thin curtains and glinted off the bracelet on my wrist. That night, curiosity overcame fear. I picked up my phone to check my heart rate like I often did. The phone connected to the bracelet, and the familiar app screen popped up with its usual graphs and health stats. I meant to just take a quick look, but my eyes were drawn to a new tab, one I'd never noticed before real-time location. I tapped on it gently, and suddenly a detailed map appeared with small blinking red dots, tracking my every move over the past several days. Every step I'd taken, every minute of my day, every place I'd visited it, was all logged in eerie, precise detail. A blinking dot hovered over my living room, then rewound to Tuesday morning. The dot paused at the pharmacy. I clearly remembered standing in the aisle, unsure whether to buy iron supplements or eye vitamins. I had been there exactly 43 minutes before the dot moved to the supermarket, then to my neighbor's house, where I'd just stopped by for a brief chat. Every second, every move, nothing had been missed. And then my heart sank. Someone had been there with me all along, not to help, but to watch. I bit my lip, unable to look away from the screen. I felt like a fugitive, like I was no longer myself. Every action had become a target for surveillance, not from someone with authority, but from the very people I loved most, the children I had raised, poured my heart into. As I stared at the app, I saw a blinking red dot marking exactly where I was, right there on the living room sofa. I froze and looked up at the ceiling, light suddenly convinced that an eye was watching me from above. Then, driven by a strange urge, I tapped the small microphone icon next to the location tab. A recording began to play, my voice crystal clear. "I think I'll plant more lavender this year." My heart skipped a beat. They could hear every word I whispered in my bedroom, in the kitchen, in the places I thought I was alone. My most private spaces had been shamelessly invaded, like an open book, being read without permission, page by page, line by line, scrutinized. I remembered how Charles, when he was little, used to whisper childhood secrets into my ear before bed. "Mom, I like Jess in class, but don't tell anyone, okay?" And now here I was, whispering to myself only to be recorded by my own child. The bracelet was no longer a gift. It had become a cage, a sophisticated surveillance tool disguised in the warmth of false affection. The next morning, I was clearer in my mind, but filled with doubt. I decided not to wear the bracelet anymore. When Charles stopped by, I noticed how his eyes immediately shifted, avoiding mine. "Did you forget to put it on?" he asked softly, but I heard the tension in his voice, the subtle suspicion, as if I had broken some serious rule. I smiled, trying to reassure him, said I had a rash on my wrist. But the forced smile and the tight press of his lips made me feel watched, judged for every little move I made. It didn't stop there. Robert called. His voice was calm, reassuring even, but beneath it was a tone of control. "How are you feeling, Mom? The device lost signal yesterday." I heard the subtext loud and clear, as if I were a patient needing round-the-clock monitoring to prevent unnecessary complications. I wondered what complications, the kind that come from a woman who's lived independently for decades, from a mother who refuses to submit to control. I started paying closer attention, noticing every little detail in my daily life. And then I discovered something even more frightening than the bracelet. In the living room where I often sat to read or sip tea, the far corner near the bookshelf, seemingly ordinary, concealed a hidden camera. It was aimed directly at the sofa where I always sat. It wasn't a technical glitch or a decorative object. It was an invisible eye, silently recording every move, every gesture I made within the walls of my own home. I caught Robert's expression when he explained, "It's just a precaution in case of an accident, Mom. It's all for your safety." But I knew this was nothing more than a justification for invading my privacy. They were tracking every step I took, every breath I exhaled right here in the place I was supposed to be most free. The feeling of being monitored minute by minute weighed on me like invisible chains, imprisoning the freedom of a woman who had once lived strong and self-reliant. And it didn't stop with the camera. Even my phone was no longer safe. One day, I discovered a strange app installed something I had never authorized. The app recorded my calls, saved my messages, tracked my GPS, and sent data to an address I didn't recognize. I felt like a lab rat experimented on inside a surveillance web crafted by the very people I trusted most. One afternoon, while I was sitting quietly in the living room, I felt a cold gaze from outside the window. I turned and saw Charles standing there, peeking through the curtain, watching me with a probing stare, like he was analyzing every thought, every emotion on my face. I felt deeply humiliated, like an outcast in my own home. That evening, while tidying my study, I came across a carefully hidden envelope in the drawer. I opened it and my blood ran cold. Inside were legal documents, a draft of a revised will authorization forms, and banking paperwork, all in my name. Plain white paper, black ink, a red underline beneath the name Robert in the authorized representative section. I read it over and over, not because I didn't understand, but because I couldn't believe it. Every word was as sharp as a blade, slicing through the bond between mother and child. Everything was filled out. All that was missing was my signature. There was even a printed email from Robert to a lawyer with the subject line, "Reorganizing Mom's Asset and Medical Authority Priority Safety." I let out a dry, bitter laugh. Safety? Is this what that looks like, Robert? And Charles's recent words echoed in my mind. "Mom, are you sure you locked the kitchen door?" A seemingly innocent question that now felt accusatory. Charles more gently, "We just want you to be safe. Maybe you should let us handle more things. I used to think it was concern. Now it felt like a noose tightening around my neck." Me, a woman who had lived fiercely independent, who raised two sons on her own strength, was now caged in an invisible prison, monitored and judged for every thought, every step in what I thought was my sanctuary. One afternoon, as I was sipping tea, Robert and Charles entered suddenly without knocking. They began searching through my phone, my laptop, opening drawers and cabinets. Robert said coldly, "We just want to make sure everything is in order, that there's nothing suspicious." I stood there like a criminal, caught in the act, accused of something, though I had done nothing wrong in my own house. I may not be young anymore. My health may be fading. But there's one thing I still hold tightly within me, something no one can take away: my will and my dignity. I knew that if I didn't stand up, if I didn't reclaim control over my life, I would fade into a shadow, a voiceless, powerless old woman stripped of her freedom in her very own home. Freedom is not a gift someone gives you. It is a basic right of fire that burns fiercely in my chest, and I was determined to protect that flame, even if it meant standing against the whole world, even if it cost me everything. One morning I sat quietly in my familiar kitchen. Soft sunlight filtered through the window, scattering broken patches of light across the table like shards of memory. The air was still so still that the only sound I could hear was my heart pounding, mixed with the swirl of chaotic thoughts and the bitter truth I had just uncovered. This house, once filled with laughter and warmth, had become a prison, a tangled web of secrets and lies. I had once been the center of this world, the one my children returned to each night, the person they trusted most. But now I saw the truth. I had become a puppet in a stage they had carefully crafted, a world in which I no longer had any control. My awakening didn't come from one sudden shattering blow, but from a quiet, creeping force, slowly rising like a tide, swelling within my soul. It stirred me awake from what seemed like a dream of happiness, but was in truth laced with schemes and lies. I was no longer the owner of my life. I had been watched, manipulated, And that realization felt like a cold blade slicing through the flesh and skin of a maternal bond I had once held with such pride. In the days that followed, I became a detective in my own home, leaving no trace unnoticed. I combed through every bit of data collected from the smart bracelet Robert had given me. Every heart rate chart, every recorded location log, every secretly captured audio clip, I copied them meticulously. The discreet email exchanges with lawyers were printed out dense with legal language about revised wills, power of attorney. Everything my children had hidden from me now lay before my eyes, undeniable and damning. One day I sat at my desk, dozens of papers neatly arranged in stacks. The dim light from the desk lamp cast soft shadows over the black and white text, and it hit me. Technology and the law had become weapons in my children's hands. Not tools of love, but instruments of brutal, invisible control. I reached out to Marianne, a former colleague, a sharp and fearless woman, someone I knew would never sit idle in the face of injustice. When I told her everything, she didn't judge me. She didn't react with shock. She simply listened and quietly prepared everything I would need to face what was coming. With Marianne beside me, I felt the strength of an alliance, the warmth of companionship in a battle I'd fought alone for far too long. I didn't hesitate when I sent out the invitation for a family meeting. No pleading, no long-winded explanations, just a short message with a time, a place, and the note that an independent attorney would be present. It was a challenge. It was the bold declaration of a woman who had found the strength to stop surrendering. That morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I chose a simple gray sweater over a crisp white blouse, symbols of simplicity, but also of quiet resolve. I pinned my mother's old brooch to my collar, a small item with great meaning, a symbol of strength of family tradition, something I wanted to hold on to no matter the storms. The house was still, but not with peaceful quiet. It was the stillness of a space, holding its breath, waiting for a storm to break. When Robert and Charles entered the living room, I no longer saw the boys I once raised. In their place stood two men's eyes, cold, harboring secrets I was about to expose. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply laid each document on the table like someone gently piecing together shattered glass. Each page was an irrefutable act of defiance. I walked them through the evidence one by one, the surveillance of my every move, the secretly recorded conversations, the plans to alter my will, the legal documents I was never told about. Each detail laid bare heavy with the undeniable weight of truth. I avoided looking them in the eyes, not because of shame, but because I feared the pain that might surface there. Pain I was no longer willing to show. I had learned to lead with reason, to preserve my dignity even when sorrow encircled me. I once believed family love could keep us united. Now I understood without respect, love becomes nothing more than an invisible chain. Robert tried to explain, his voice cold yet filled with rationalizations. It was all for safety, Mom. We just wanted to protect you from unnecessary risks. I cut him off, my voice sharp as ice. Safety. If you truly wanted to protect me, why did you take away my right to choose my voice? Safety and imprisonment are just one step apart, and I no longer stand in the safety zone. Charles lowered his gaze, his unease written across his every movement. Robert stood, stiff eyes piercing, but I saw it, a flicker of guilt, or maybe fear, fear of the strength I was reclaiming. I ended the meeting with unwavering clarity. All powers of attorney are revoked. I am reclaiming full control over my assets, my health, and my private life. I will appoint an independent attorney, someone unaffiliated with this family, to protect my rights in all matters going forward. I am no longer the weak mother, no longer the woman under someone's control. I am the woman who stands up and takes her life back. The room fell into heavy silence, no shouting, no tears, just the suffocating weight of unspoken truths and wounds yet to heal. Robert was the first to stand cold, expressionless, and walked out without a word. Charles followed, his eyes quiet, filled with regret and helplessness. I remained seated, unmoved, because in that moment I knew silence was my greatest power. When the door closed behind them, I turned back to look at the last rays of sunlight filtering through the window, casting their glow across the papers scattered on the table. I didn't feel relief, at least not yet, but I felt something clearer. I had walked through the storm with resilience and clarity. I would not lose myself again. The road ahead would not be easy. Cold, distant days were likely still waiting, but I chose to face it not with fear, but with the strength of a woman who had once carried the world on her shoulders. I was no longer just a mother defined by sacrifice and silence. I was Kathleen, a woman of freedom of resolve, and one who would never again allow anyone to take ownership of her life. That morning, as pale sunlight passed softly through the gaps in the curtains, I began with small, seemingly trivial tasks, yet each held a strange, invisible weight. They were the first steps on a long road back to myself. I changed my Wi-Fi password. I deleted every app connected to the smart bracelet that had once served as Robert's silent eye infiltrating my private life. I revoked all of Robert's access to my bank accounts, emails, and other communication platforms. Those small technical gestures didn't just cut the lines of control, they were symbolic. They were the early signs of power returning to its rightful place. I took all my electronic devices to an independent tech center, asking them to perform a full security sweep to detect and remove any spyware tracking programs or hidden configurations. I called it my digital cleansing, not just a cleanse of machines, but a test of my own mind, a release from the invisible chains that had strangled me for so long. What seemed simple was only the beginning. It was a quiet step, but a firm one. After years of being manipulated and controlled, reclaiming freedom bit by bit was a meticulous and patient process. I didn't expect everything to change overnight. Robert and Charles had built a sophisticated enclosed system, a cage, where I had once been a prisoner without a voice. Now, as I cut each invisible string by hand, I could feel the hum of life returning to my every step. Later, I met again with Marianne, my companion and the friend I had come to trust deeply. This time there was no hesitation, no careful recounting of betrayal. This was action decisive collaboration to complete the legal processes. Marianne helped me draft documents to officially revoke all unauthorized changes to my will and powers of attorney. Everything was drawn up with clarity and transparency, witnessed by an independent attorney and reliable witnesses. It was a legal boundary, a strong, undeniable wall, a barrier against any future attempt to take control of my life again. For the first time in years, I felt like I was steering my life again. But soon I realized that legal and technical matters were just the surface of the iceberg. The deepest challenge lived inside me, where emotions had been shattered, where memories and hope blended into confusion. Pain didn't roar like a storm, didn't crash in waves. It wore me down quietly like land, slowly eroding. I remembered the sleepless nights sitting by the window, staring out into the small yard, blanketed in fallen yellow leaves, a cold cup of tea on the table beside me. I felt empty, alone like the chair across from me, once filled by someone I loved, now forever unoccupied. Memories of Robert and Charles's childhood floated in my mind. Robert's innocent eyes as a child running into my arms to escape the noise of arguments, or Charles's joyful laugh the first time he was praised for a high-scoring essay. Those moments so simple felt like colorful shards of glass scattered on the floor, still catching light, but long since broken. I couldn't go back. I couldn't undo what had been done, but I could choose to move forward. I could choose not to collapse under the weight of those wounds. I started with Charles, my younger son, the one I still believed had a flicker of kindness left, a thread of love not yet buried beneath ambition and cold logic. I invited him to lunch simple without pressure. The first time he declined his eyes, avoiding mine, his voice quiet and distant like a stranger. The second time he came, he offered no explanations, just a hesitancy and a look filled with guilt and uncertainty. I didn't ask for apologies. I didn't demand confession. We spoke about simple things, work, the weather, trivial stories we'd never shared before. No events were unpacked, no wounds reopened. But slowly these meetings became a new habit. a small step toward rebuilding the bridge between a mother and her son, even if it was quiet, even if it was cautious. With Robert, I chose a deeper kind of silence, not out of coldness, but as a boundary to protect myself. After that tense family meeting, I sent him a brief message. I am still your mother, but I'm also a free person. I didn't expect a reply, and indeed, Robert never responded. I didn't place my hopes in reconciliation or apologies from someone who had treated his mother with betrayal and manipulation. But I kept a door open in my heart. If one day he truly wished to understand, to change, I would be willing to welcome him on one condition. Respect must be the foundation, and it is non-negotiable. In the days that followed, I focused on healing myself slowly, as though rising again from the ashes of the past. I signed up for a basic photography class at the local community center, something I had always dreamed of but never dared to do. Through the lens, I learned to see the world differently again, not as a place of sadness, but as one that sparked the desire to live fully and truly. I found a sense of kinship in a group of independent older women, women who had been through life, bore their scars, but never lost their strength. Among them, I didn't have to explain or pretend. Just being present was enough to be seen to begin healing. One spring afternoon, Marianne and I hosted a small talk at the public library. The topic, legal rights for the elderly, a subject many avoid. I shared my story not to assign blame, but to remind everyone long silence only feeds injustice. Afterward, a woman held my hand tightly, her eyes brimming with tears. I thought I was the only one. In that moment, I understood. In silent suffering, the most precious gift is to be understood. Recovery isn't linear. Some days I felt strong, radiant like morning sunlight. But some nights, loneliness swept in like a cold wind through an open window. I didn't force myself to forgive or erase every scar overnight. I simply learned how to live with the fracture, and in doing so realized I cannot change the past, but I have every right to rewrite the future. I came to understand that freedom is not loneliness. It is the power to choose how I live alone. Or not, that is my decision. I can love my children, but that does not mean I must forget to love myself, and that is not a contradiction. In fact, it is the balance I had been missing. Now every morning I still make tea. I still sit by the window feeling the breeze, but something inside me has changed. I am no longer a mother who quietly sacrifices in silence. I am no longer a woman silently controlled. I am Kathleen, a human being living her second life, clearer, wiser, no longer afraid of loss. I had thought that after the family meeting, everything would settle. The boundaries had been drawn, control had been reclaimed. I believed a peaceful life within that independence would be the beginning of a gentle new chapter. But no, for some people, another's autonomy is not a right to respect, but a threat to be extinguished. And once again, the storm began to rise. Just a few weeks later, I received an email from Robert. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a peace offering. It was a cold message written like a corporate memo. He expressed serious concern about my mental state and stated he would consider legal actions to ensure my safety if the situation does not improve. Those words were colder than any winter wind. They pierced straight through me, like an invisible knife twisting in the heart of a mother who had once poured all her love into that son. I sat in silence for hours after reading that email, not because I was afraid, but because I could not believe that my own flesh and blood could use legal language to try to strip freedom from the woman who once held him through sleepless nights. Less than a week later, I received a court summons. Robert had formally filed a petition questioning my legal capacity, accusing me of signs of memory loss, erratic behavior, and an inability to manage my own affairs. Attached was a lengthy report, dozens of pages, authored by a psychologist I had never met. It was clearly fabricated, hired to create a false narrative. I didn't panic, but the pain was deep, so deep it made me ache from the inside out. The pain of public betrayal, of watching my own son weaponize the law against me. No longer was it covert surveillance through technology. This had become an open war, cold, calculated, and merciless. Marianne turned pale when I brought her the file. "You need to prepare for a real legal battle," she said. This isn't just about property or rights. It's about dignity, the right to exist as a full human being respected. In the days that followed, I had to undergo a battery of evaluations, comprehensive physical exams, memory tests, cognitive assessments, logic and reasoning, evaluations ordered by the court. At times, I felt like a criminal trying to prove her innocence. In a trial where the accuser was her own son, news of the case spread quickly. Even in my neighborhood, people began whispering. Neighbors averted their eyes when they passed me. Old friends called hesitant, unsure of what to say. I became the mother whose son took her to court for suspected dementia, a title soaked in sorrow and isolation. Society is quick to choose sides, rarely needing proof. But I did not crumble. On the contrary, I stood tall, ready to face my final battle with unshakable determination. The day of the hearing, I dressed plainly. My hair was tied back neatly, no makeup. I brought with me old photographs, handwritten letters from Robert, as a child, his messy scrawl, saying, "Mom, you're my best friend in the whole world." I didn't plan to submit them as evidence. They were there to remind me of the little boy who once loved his mother, the person I still hoped existed somewhere within Robert. Before the judge, I answered every question clearly and calmly. I relied not only on medical reports that proved my mental competence, but also on the support of my lawyer, an independent psychologist, reliable witnesses, and most of all, the strength of the women who had stood with me. I shared my perspective. I am fully capable of managing my life, my finances, my choices. I am not a helpless woman in need of protection. I am a free individual deserving of respect and a life of her own. The hearing lasted several days, but when the judge delivered her final verdict, she dismissed Robert's petition, ruling that I had full legal capacity and autonomy. The small courtroom erupted not in noise, but in stunned silence, and when people looked at me, it was no longer with doubt, but with something closer to admiration. I exhaled slowly, like I had just set down an unbearable weight. This wasn't just a mother's victory. It was the triumph of resilience, of self-love, of a spirit that would not be broken. I walked out of the courthouse without looking back. Only the sky ahead. Not because I had won, but because I knew, from that moment forward, every step I took would be mine, even if I walked it alone. I know life still holds challenges for me, but I am no longer the powerless, voiceless woman I once was. And so a new chapter begins, one of rebirth of love and of true freedom. And what about you? Have you ever been cared for in ways that felt like control? Have you ever had to stay silent just to reclaim your own freedom? If you have a story to share, leave it in the comments. I'll read every word with care. Don't forget to like and share this video if this story resonated with you. And if you'd like to keep following real-life reflections like this, hit that follow button. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. See you next time for another story that's deep, quiet, and very real.